lovely spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo!
Where this week we let the patrons choose for us.
Indeed, we did. I'm pretty excited about it. Our wonderful patrons all voted on a poll, and they decided which topic we were going to choose, and it's nice to not have the pressure of figuring out what I want to do for myself. Exporting my decisions is one of my favorite things to do here and there. So, Robin, what are the topics that our wonderful patrons selected for us?
So, I am doing the Black Dahlia, and you are doing Project Blue Book.
Indeed, I am. Pretty excited about it.
Which we did not know was a TV show.
I kind of had heard about it. I think I found out about it a while back, or someone had mentioned it. But yeah, when I started doing my research, I was like, oh, god damn it, because it's all that pops up when you type in Project Blue Book at first. So, exciting stuff. If you want to tell us what to do, you can always go over to patreon.com/Scaryish podcast and sign up for a monthly donation. Those start out as low as $1, and with the dollar tier, you get early access and ad-free content, which is pretty solid for 4 quarters every month. Just saying, I think I'm going to be the one who goes first this episode.
Cool.
Covering Project Blue Book. Quick shout out before we get going, once a month, depending on the patron level. So I want to go ahead and give a shout out to Sam and Andrew, Ethan and Cody for their donations. We sincerely appreciate it. Being at that tier means that we give you a shout out once a month, and we mean it from the bottom of our hearts because it really helps us keep the podcast going. So now I will move in to my patron selected topic. This week, as we just mentioned, the wonderful patrons chose our topics. Like previous iterations of Patron's Choice, I think they actually did a pretty good job. The topic that I picked from the two is Project Blue Book, and it is interesting to say the least. I found out quite a bit about Project Blue Book I did not know. I went into this thing with the intention of doing my darndest to bring you information on the mysterious and the enigmatic Project Blue Book. And I gotta say, I found out quite a bit about it, some good, some bad, and we're going to go through all of it. So, this topic poses a series of challenges when covering it. The first is that there was a History Channel TV show, like we mentioned, by the same name that started a couple of years back, and it appears to have been canceled after 2 seasons. Side note, the lead of the show was Littlefinger, the actor who played Littlefinger, so it must have been kind of hard to trust him because he is just such a good actor at playing someone who's a scumbag. The other challenge posed by this topic for me is that it could very easily devolve into me breaking down any of the many incidents that Project Blue Book themselves investigated or claims to have investigated. And I really wanted this project to be more about I wanted this topic to be more about Project Blue Book themselves rather than the incidents that they investigated. And therein lies the most challenging part for me. How do I talk about an organization within the government without going too deeply into its cases, but also making it interesting? And I'm not sure if I accomplished it, but here goes nothing. So, some of you have likely heard of Project Blue Book in the past, considering you're listening to a show called Scaryish, which is about paranormal, extraterrestrial, true crime, and stuff of that nature.
But if you're new to us, you can go back a few episodes, and there's a whole bunch about aliens, so...
Yeah, we have stuff like that. But for those of you who don't know what Project Blue Book is, allow me to explain. Project Blue Book is an organization that is within the U.S. Air Force, or I should say was within the U.S. Air Force, that existed from 1947 to 1969. Their sole purpose was the investigation of unidentified flying objects. It is a side gig, so to speak, that had folks assigned to it that were going to investigate these things that were so controversial, especially at the time. It sounds like an episode of The X-Files, or like the premise of The X-Files, and the reason that it sounds like that is because Project Blue Book is one of the inspirations for the TV show X-Files, among many other TV shows that inspired, most notably Project Blue Book, named after it. Something to note here, this is not the first time the U.S. military formed an organization for UFO investigations. In fact, the lines get kind of blurred here. So in 1947, the government actually created Project Sign, which had a very similar mission to Project Blue Book, investigate UFO sightings, and then distribute information that was collected within the government, not release official press releases or reach out to anyone outside the organization, keep everyone within the government on the same page about what's going on. Project Sign only lasted about a year. In that time, one hypothesis they tossed out was that the objects were secret Soviet weapons. And I find this very interesting because this sort of hypothesis would only be made if what they were investigating, existed. If it wasn't just a hoax or, they saw a cloud or it was Venus, they wouldn't say something like that. They said that whatever was seen could possibly be some sort of Soviet technology or weaponry. Something to note is that the first name for Project Sign was actually Project Saucer. And it's in all caps. And I feel like they tried to
Sounds saucy.
I feel like they tried to find a way to turn the word into an acronym, but failed, and just call it Project Sign. We don't even care. It has a very SHIELD feel to it.
Sounds like someone really wanted us to be called SHIELD.
Right? It's all caps and everything. There's no periods after each letter, but it had that appearance. So I was like, okay, I understand why they switched it to Sign. Didn't last long. It ended after about a year, and it was followed up by Project Grudge, which is such a weird name for a project about anything. And this one's about investigating UFOs.
It sounds like whoever named all these things was so lame. Just so lame.
I thought okay, they must not have been trying too hard. And then as I started reading more about Project Grudge, I was like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. So Project Grudge started right after Project Sign stopped. And it was also about investigating UFOs. But it was really more about the standard intelligence collection and investigation, not so much trying to determine what the objects could be like Sign was, but trying to figure out ways that they could prove it wasn't actually a UFO. They went into each investigation with the intent on proving whatever was seen to be completely explainable as an atmospherical phenomenon, and they even said that, you saw a moving object that descended from 22,000 feet to 10 feet and then flew around and then disappeared. What you actually saw was a cloud. Basically, they were trying to find anything within someone's story to just let them know what you saw was totally normal and you didn't see what you actually think you saw. They were about dismissing evidence and trying to quell people's curiosity with unidentified flying objects. So, in case you're wondering, it's kind of a textbook way to do an investigation incorrectly. It's why people get taught the scientific method in school. I remember we all went through that in science class. That wasn't just bullshit. There's a reason they teach you that. It's so even if you have a hypothesis about what's going on, regardless about what the situation is, if you use the scientific method, you can gather information in this unbiased fashion so that your conclusion isn't a bunch of bullshit. It's not inspired by the hypothesis, it's inspired by the actual data. Which, by the way, is exactly how they should explain it in school. What they tell you in school, no one ever fucking remembers. Data is meant to prove what's happening, not meant to prove what you wish was happening or what you want to be happening. Project Grudge didn't give a shit. Their purpose was to determine whatever they were investigating to be completely normal. Side note, this isn't just my opinion or me relaying someone else's opinion off the internet. Several members of the organization said in the media in 1949 that they thought UFOs were horseshit, in just kinder words, and that the only people that reported UFOs and started the craze about it were people that were liars or people that were mentally ill. And people like that would be the only people that would believe them. So it's not shocking that Project Grudge didn't last long. No one wanted to be involved with it in the first place, and they thought it was all nonsense. And although it supposedly ceased operations in December of 1949, it continued to unofficially operate until late 1951. So it's 2 years went by where basically all the cases that came in were dumped there, but they didn't have an official capacity, and they weren't doing any official work. And even though the, quote, official fact sheet, as it's called, from the Air Force for Project Blue Book states that it started in 1947, they actually are grouping together Project Sign and Project Grudge with Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book actually didn't start until 1952.
That's not that long ago.
It's a 5-year difference, but when you're talking about something where you're trying to enhance credibility by telling the truth, the fact that the official website for the Air Force on Project Blue Book right now has a number of 1947 or a date of 1947 that's technically not true is so fucking weird to me. Here's some interesting stuff. So from 1947 to 1952, I'm going to give you the total number of sightings that were investigated, along with the total number of sightings that were determined to be, quote, unidentified. So in 1947, there was 122 sightings investigated, 12 were unidentified. So the first year, about 10%. In 48, 156 were investigated, 7 were considered to be unidentified. 1949, this is when Project Grudge takes over. It's 186 investigated, 22 unidentified. So even though they came in there with the intentions of debunking things, even if they weren't debunkable, they were just going to say, yeah, it's horseshit. They had to classify 22 as unidentified.
That's a lot.
Yeah. 1950, 210 investigations, 27 unidentified. And 1951, 169 investigations, 22 marked as unidentified. Then Project Blue Book takes off in 1952. And it's actually named after those blue booklets that you use when you're taking a written test in college. How you have to, like, write out your hypothesis or write out your theory or write out your... Have you ever used one of those at all?
Yeah, but I only wrote history essays in them.
Yeah, it's typically for essays. I used them a bunch when I was doing my final couple years. I did creative writing, so it was just like, okay, here's a book and a pen. Like, just write down whatever the topic is. So I'm very familiar with them. And I think it's funny because the guy who was first in charge of Project Blue Book was Captain Edward Ruppelt, Ruppelt. He picked that name because when it kicked off, all these high-ranking officers within the Air Force were paying really, really close attention to the project because they wanted official results. And he said it felt like he was taking a college exam. That's what the pressure reminded him of. So Project Blue Book got its name from that. And he was actually really good at coming up with names. He came up with some other names as well. He's actually the person who is credited with coining the term unidentified flying object.
Nice.
Because up until then, people had called them flying saucers or flying discs, including the military, and he felt that it needed a more neutral term. Because a lot of times, if you just use the term flying saucer or flying disc, people looked at you like you were crazy. Project Blue Book also enlisted the help of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was an astronomer who had already been with the project when it was Project Sign and Project Grudge. An interesting thing to note about Dr. Hynek, he was actually chosen originally because he was very, very skeptical of UFOs in general. So they're like, put the only scientist on the entire team has to be someone who thinks it's pretty much bullshit.
That was Scully.
And there's your science. That's their Scully. That's 100% true. That is their Scully. So he takes a pretty Scully-esque arc as well, by the way. Ruppelt took it seriously, and he developed standard questions to be asked because he wanted the collection of information to be sort of a standard type of investigation. I think it's important that these things be used and applied in a UFO type situation because they just make sense. So when they were doing an investigation, if they were interviewing a witness, they had multiple questions that they would ask to all of them. The first is, draw a picture that will show the shape of the object or objects. It's not just use your words and tell me what you saw. Draw what you think you saw. Second is, what was the condition of the sky? They're trying to gather information about the atmosphere.
Like if it's stormy or
exactly.
Or
so then
cloudy
they can
or whatever.
Like put these pieces together, you know? And then the questions get a little bit weirder because they are talking about UFOs. Did the object suddenly speed up and rush away at any time? Did the object change shape? Did the object flicker, throb, or pulsate?
That sounds sexy.
That last one is intended to be read slowly. But Ruppelt was about a level-headed approach to these things. He had 3 of his staff dismissed in the early days of the project without much explanation. He later wrote a book about it and stated that he got rid of anyone at the beginning of the project who was, quote, too con or too pro to what they were going for. So if you were a believer or if you were a super skeptic, he wanted you gone. He wanted people with open minds to perform investigations without bias, which is how you should really do these things. So in 1952... the number for sightings that they investigated went up. The most that had ever been investigated to that point was 210. In 1952, they investigated 1,501 sightings.
What?
Among
That's a
those,
huge jump.
it's a huge jump. Among those, 303 went on to be classified as unidentified.
And we can read all this, right? All the documents for
No,
these?
you can't. Most of them are still classified, especially the actual sightings that were determined to be or designated as unidentified. But it's 1 in 5. 1 in 5 sightings came back as unidentified in 1952. That's a fuck ton of sightings to come back as unidentified. So Project Blue Book sought out scientists and experts to try and help them classify these sightings to make sure that they were correct. And even after going and reaching out to experts about what their findings were, they still came back with roughly 20 to 25% of their sightings as unidentified flying objects. The Project Blue Book team initially in 1952 was authorized to interview anyone within the military who had witnessed a UFO. Literally anyone. They were also not required at all to follow the chain of command, which in the military is a huge fucking deal, you know? These higher officers that were watching this thing basically gave them carte blanche to investigate whatever way they needed to, and Ruppelt took it seriously. One of the more notable things that Project Blue Book investigated in 1952 was a series of sightings in Washington, D.C., so kind of an important place to have aliens flying their fucking ships around. Literally hundreds of sightings had come in a very short amount of time from thousands of witnesses of unidentified flying objects over the nation's capital. There were radar technicians at the National Airport in Washington, D.C. that noted the detection of unidentified flying objects on their radars in the areas that matched the locations of the sightings.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of really, really creepy. A panel was put together by the CIA to dissect what was happening and analyze the evidence that had been collected by Project Blue Book on this one particular incident. In the end, the panel got together and determined that there were indeed UFOs that were, quote, unverifiable. So it's like, yeah, there's something there, but we can't verify that everyone isn't lying. And the largest risk to the U.S. was twofold. The first is that reports of these objects are clogging the intelligence channels. So it's like, we can't talk about other shit because everyone's talking about these UFOs, which is risky. And the second thing is that the public's growing concern itself posed a threat to the United States. People were getting way too curious. People were asking way too many questions. People were getting really nervous in general. I hate you so much. The panel recommended that the Air Force focus on debunking rather than validating, which means we have yet again shifted to a recommendation for an era of bullshit research to reach a conclusion that a panel of folks deemed to be best for public safety, basically. It should be noted that of the 6 years worth of data that was collected on this single event in Washington, D.C., Project Blue Book collected so much data, they said it was 6 years worth of data. 12 hours was spent reviewing it. When those 12 hours were up, it was then determined by the panel that most reports from folks who saw these UFOs didn't have elegant enough language to really be taken seriously or describe adequately what they saw, and therefore should be dismissed. The ones that did have the adequate language could most likely be explained if they were to investigate further. There must be some sort of natural explanation that we're just not seeing, and it was then determined based off of that conclusion that it wasn't worth the effort to continue investigating it. Which is the most absurd logic I've ever fucking heard of. It's like they said, although the evidence and the witness reports point to a bizarre conclusion, we're just going to disregard it because they use too simple of language every now and then, and I'm sure we could get the answer we want if we look hard enough, but we're not going to do that. Let's just accept our alternate conclusion based on what we assume we would find if we put any effort into this at all.
So stupid.
And that's basically case closed on the Washington, D.C. UFO incident.
That's just so ridiculous.
Imagine doing that at your job. Imagine doing that at school. Like going to your work or school and giving a presentation and just being like, so I was going to present today, but the data didn't look right, so I decided the data must be wrong, and that the data actually would look totally different and awesome if I did the work. I'm not going to do that, though. Let's just all picture the data you want to see. You're welcome. That's your new reality. Thank you. Goodbye. And then expecting to get an A, which apparently they did.
Just want to slap you. I hated that voice so much.
You're welcome. It's not shocking that after this all took place and the new mindset of just debunk things, don't actually investigate them, the authority that the Project Blue Book had was stripped away. They were no longer outside the chain of command. They were no longer allowed to interview whoever they wanted. Project Blue Book went from just over 10 people. They say the number is not nailed down, but between 10 to 13. From that number to 3 directly after this panel. And those 3 included Captain Ruppelt himself. So he had 2 subordinates for investigating all these matters, and that was it.
So it turned into X-Files.
Pretty much. And he wound up requesting reassignment immediately. He wound up leaving in August of 1953, barely making it more than a year. So his replacement was a man named Captain Charles Hardin, who did not believe in UFOs and thought anyone who did was batshit crazy. His mandate was to only investigate, quote, major UFO incidents and to minimize the amount that would be classified as unidentified. So it's like when you have any sort of goal in mind where people are like, I don't care how you get there, just show me a number.
Just fudge the numbers and make it less.
Just show me the numbers that says that things are good. So In 1953, 509 investigations, still a lot, a third of what happened the year before. 42 came back as unidentified. And then over the next 3 years, it went 487 investigations, 46 unidentified, 545, and only 24 unidentified. And then by 1956, 670 investigations, the second most ever, and only 14 unidentified, which, by the way, is 2%. Hardin, despite generally not caring at all and apparently not putting anything in, he basically just showed up and collected a paycheck, got his goals taken care of because he got the unidentified number down to 2% in just 4 years. And I gotta say, it does not get better for Project Blue Book from here on out. The next guy that takes over once he leaves in 1956 is Captain George Gregory. He thought even less of UFOs and those who sighted them. He thought that Hardin, in his lackadaisical approach to this, wasn't nearly aggressive enough in his debunking. And this fucking dude actually went in and changed their ranking system for conclusions like only a next-level douchebag could. If there was a logical conclusion that they had deemed as possible, like, it's possible it was a balloon, or it's possible it was gas trapped in the atmosphere, something like that, anything with the possible designation was officially changed to probable.
What?
So if it's like, it's possible it was this, it was officially probable it was that. It's most likely that. Because instantly the numbers just look better, and it looks like everyone else is just making shit up. Maybe you're thinking, well, maybe they just wanted to include the designation of probable and adjust what the guidelines were. Well, they actually already had probable in their list of designations. He just changed basically where it was going to fall. You know, he changed the value essentially. Anything that had previously been listed as probable was given the new designation of certainty. So if something was probably a balloon, it was certainly a balloon. So you might have this evidence that sort of suggests it could be this one thing. Now it's certain that's exactly what it is. And you'll see this verbiage across plenty of the press releases from this time on what major sightings could be. They have determined that it is certainly this, which is bullshit. It's just a way that you can adjust things so that you can get the results you want. It got to the point where they weren't actually doing research or investigations like they should have on what something might have been. If a witness said, I saw a UFO that was balloon-like in shape, their new direction, their new directive, was to classify the object as exactly what the object's description was. So if it was balloon-like,
It was a balloon.
it's certainly a balloon. If it was airplane-like, it's certainly an airplane. Comet-like, it's certainly a comet. And that one got them in trouble. They started saying that they were seeing comets in the sky, and scientists around the country started coming out and saying, actually, there's no comets in the sky right now, especially in the region that you're looking at. There's a certain level of visibility to the sky where even if there was a comet in the southern hemisphere, someone wouldn't be able to see it. So actual scientists started calling out their absolute laziness, and it completely destroyed the credibility of Project Blue Book. And the only thing that really went on is that they started to ignore the scientists, and then they started to attack their reputations for standing up for facts. They'd go out and basically say, this person's a crackpot. They believe in unidentified flying objects. Look, it has the official designation from the U.S. Air Force as not a UFO. How crazy are they?
This person's a crackhead.
Yeah, they were literally doing this to people. Project Blue Book actually claimed that a sighting from multiple witnesses was just Jupiter. They all just saw Jupiter in the sky, only to have astronomers come out when they released the official findings all over the country to let them know Jupiter wasn't actually visible in the night sky at that time. And they just ignored it because too many people came out to tell them, you're fucking idiots, that makes no sense. However, with this new direction, in 1957 they did 1,006 investigations and found 14 to be unidentified flying objects.
Wow.
And in 1958, 627 investigations, and they found 10 to be unidentified flying objects.
It's just getting less and less and less.
It's basically, here's your mandate, give me the numbers I want to see. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter how absurd it is. That's what I want to see. So Captain George Gregory now leaves, and Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend then takes over. And he tried to get back to a more scientific approach, but he was also not the best at it. Dr. Hynek is still with Project Blue Book, by the way. He's been with it since inception. He's still there. And he's very happy because he's kept his feelings quiet to this point. But over this past decade he's been on the project, he has converted from a skeptic. He's taken the full Scully arc. He felt that UFOs, especially the ones that after their investigations were complete, that received the unidentified designation, were very, very real. And he also requested older cases in the last 4 or 5 years that had been considered possible, probable, or certain be reevaluated because they weren't handled properly. Unfortunately, Friend was like, nah, we're just not going to do that. During this time, though, the Air Force considered moving the investigations to other agencies. Essentially, they didn't want this approach to be taken again. They had tried a lot by putting new people in place to get rid of it, to just have the debunking method be used. And when they tried to move it to some other organization or some other department or some other branch of military, everyone was like, no, dude, we're good. That shit is career suicide. We don't want to touch it. By then, though, people were just fed up with Project Blue Book. In 1960, because of public complaint, they got pulled into congressional hearings as they were officially being accused of covering up UFO sightings and destroying evidence with their lackluster investigations and bullshit conclusions that they were just slapping the official seal onto as, oh, it's done. So essentially the idea of calm the public down by debunking these things was completely undone by the fact that they did it by lying through their teeth like morons that anyone with a brain could see that they were lying. And the years of this behavior did more to validate people's beliefs in unidentified flying objects than debunk it. When you have someone who's just going out there and choosing to lie blatantly to the public, where you can just prove that they're lying, it just seems like they're hiding stuff. And that's exactly what people in 1960 decided was happening. The only deterrent that anyone actually had since Project Blue Book's inception for speaking out about UFOs is fear that their reputation would be attacked. And that mindset still exists to this day. And there is more. There's one more leader change, and this makes 5. In 1963, Major Hector Quintanilla took over. If you watch the Project Blue Book show, he's the namesake for the second character, Captain Michael Quinn. That's not someone who was ever actually involved with Project Blue Book. That's just the catchy name that they decided to go with instead of Hector Quintanilla. So I don't know what he's like on the show, but he's kind of an asshole in real life. He was widely declared as not competent due to the fact that he made the investigations about debunking in the laziest ways again. And it started to damage not just the reputation of Project Blue Book, but the reputation of the Air Force. Now, a UFO sighting occurred in Texas and Oklahoma that had several hundred witnesses, including citizens, law enforcement, and military. The object in question at one point was observed descending from 22,000 feet to 4,000 feet in a matter of seconds.
Ooh, that's fast.
Tinker Air Force Base tracked 4 UFOs simultaneously during this incident that were documented. However, only one of them was seen. Project Blue Book's determination for this was everyone saw Jupiter and bright stars. Even the radars. So weird that you all saw Jupiter and bright stars. And that's how they left it. They didn't even give a shit. Didn't matter to them. That's the official classification for all of it.
It was only 3 people at this point, right? So it's like, fuck
no,
it.
there's more. It got down to 3 people back when they got ripped apart, but then when they brought on new leadership, they got back up to like 5 to 10 people. Another sighting took place in Ohio in 1966. An object was observed by 2 police officers, Dale Spar and Wilbur Neff. They decided to follow the object because they could not figure out what it was, as it descended from 1,000 feet in the air to 50 feet in the air,
Whoa.
which is not fucking high at all. This was seen by lots of people, and multiple police joined the pursuit, all observing this object that no one knew what it was. They wound up going from Ohio into Pennsylvania before the object ascended and disappeared. It was a full-blown police chase with massive amounts of police chasing this thing, and it just fucking vanished. So what winds up happening here is Project Blue Book goes, interviews a single officer, and then releases the official finding. All police officers involved in this had followed a communication satellite that was in the atmosphere and then saw Venus. And that's it. Hynek?
How?
Dr. Hynek called these classifications absurd and denounced the methods and lack thereof used to determine this. They were back to not even checking if the stars were visible in the night sky or not, or where the stars would be in relation to the observation from all of these people.
Wow.
One of the police officers had been an Air Force gunner in the Korean War and stated he felt betrayed by his government that he fought for. Eugene Bertrand and David Hunt, 2 police officers involved in the chase/sighting, wrote Major Quintanilla a letter about how the Air Force had handled the matter in a horrible fashion and ridiculed those involved. They felt their reputations had been destroyed by the Air Force. Their descriptions of what they had seen, according to Dr. Hennick, were of the moon, where they let the investigators know in their descriptions, here's where the moon was, here's where the bright star was in the sky, which was right next to the moon, which is where Venus was, and here's where the UFO was, which is in a different part of the sky. So the official conclusion completely discounts the fact that multiple police officers involved in this chase, and the direction they were heading on the road was the opposite direction of the moon and Venus.
Wow.
It's just a slap in the fucking face. And on top of that, the only scientist involved in Project Blue Book was speaking out against these findings. The official findings basically picked and chose what it wanted to include to make these people appear stupid or crazy. And it didn't work. The local community was outraged. A congressman from Ohio named William Stanton stated, quote, "The Air Force has suffered a great loss of prestige in this community. Once people entrusted with the public welfare no longer think the police can handle the truth or the people, then the people in return will no longer trust the government," end quote. This guy just came out and he's like, you're fucking lying to us. We all know you're lying to us, and now we don't trust you at all. Again, the lesson that was being learned by those involved was to keep their mouths shut, which is probably what they were trying to do this whole time. Quintanilla was the last person in charge of Project Blue Book. He led to the downfall of the organization, which was treated, for its majority, as a nuisance by the Air Force itself, and eventually as a joke from the public. The final results for the remaining years are as follows. I'm going to give you the amount of investigations again, and the amount of unidentified flying objects. I'm going to do it quick, okay? 1959, 390 and 12. 1960, 557 and 14. 61, 591 investigations, 13 official unidentified flying objects. 62, 474 and 15. 63, 399 and 14. 64, 562 and 19. 65, 887 and 16. 66, 1,112, because it blew the fuck up in 66.
What happened in 66?
A bunch of different things, including the one in Texas and Oklahoma. Or, I'm sorry, in Ohio. 67, 937 and 19. 68, 375 and 3. And 1969, 146. Only 146 were investigated, and 1 was claimed to be an unidentified flying object.
Wow.
Project Blue Book had essentially, from the inside, by intention, been killed. Project Blue Book was officially terminated December of 1969 and officially shut down on January 19th, 1970. It was regarded as, quote, unnecessary by the military. It's a real mission accomplished moment for them, where they decide they proved that UFOs don't exist by lying through their teeth for the better part of 2 decades. The public found it to be a half-assed organization for covering up the truth, and the military either thought it was a joke from the skeptics or career poison for the open-minded. It should be noted that a new Project Blue Book was formed in 1989.
Really?
However, it is not in any way, shape, or form associated with a branch of military. It's made up by citizens.
Oh, all right.
It does include scientists and former military, basically what you would expect Project Blue Book should actually be if it includes citizens. They officially wrote the director of the FBI in 1989 asking for assistance on verifying unidentified flying objects, to which he actually replied. And to summarize what he said, it was, nah, dog, we don't investigate that shit at the FBI. Try NASA. So that was the official response from the FBI in 1989. There are many organizations out there nowadays that research and investigate UFO sightings and incidents. The Air Force kind of does so within a reasonable amount. Any incident that takes place in the sky, they have to investigate. But they're mostly just collected, marked as classified, and then stored. That's why we have those videos from like 2015 that leaked out,
yeah,
that everyone saw. And then in 2020, the government came out and said, yeah, those are official UFO videos. Like, they were leaked. They are real. We don't know what they are. We also aren't investigating it, so don't give a shit. And then everyone's like, oh my god, they admitted UFOs are real. It's like, no. They admitted that the videos were of unidentified flying objects, which they don't care to investigate. So that's pretty much what we have for official representation from our government when it comes to UFOs, at least in the United States. I gotta say, I was really excited to cover Project Blue Book. I had heard of it and was really interested that there was an official organization within the government that used to exist in charge of investigating. but it really turned out to like be just as ineffective and disappointing as most forms of government that I've put my hope in before. And I do believe still that the truth is out there. But these guys were not looking for it. Maybe a few of them were for a little bit of time, but for the most part, they didn't care. And that said, I did discover some very interesting incidents that they ignored or blew off or gave an official designation of, we don't know what it was, to, that I'll be covering in the future. And maybe this October, I'm thinking since it's only a month away now, will be my month of extraterrestrials. I'm not 100% certain, but I found one that is absolutely mind-blowing. And I was really worried that my topic was going to turn into that, so...
Adam's Mind Blowers.
It's going to be Morty's Mind Blowers. It's going to be coming up in the near future. But it involves, like, every military from around the globe seeing unidentified flying objects at the same time. And is absolutely fascinating. So, I guess some good came out of this topic. But thank you so much to the patrons for encouraging me to cover it, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Cool. Thank you. Before we get into the second half of the episode, we're going to take a quick break. And during this break, hopefully you guys put on your true crime caps. And we're going to get into some true crime.
Get ready for some murder most foul.
All right. This is the other side of that break, the true crime side of the break. And I'm going to go straight into it, I guess. So I've been putting off this topic since the beginning of our podcast because it's just such an intense one, at least for me, because it's just a really gory situation, I think.
I've heard of it, but I know no details about this.
The details behind everything that is the Black Dahlia is really something that takes a strong stomach, I think. We did put it up on the poll, and you guys helped us decide it. And this one was one of the top two by a pretty good margin.
I think this had number one, the most.
Was it the most?
Votes, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, number one. Woo woo. I
honestly, like, give me that gory true crime shit.
So on the morning of January 15th, 1947, a naked body was found in a vacant lot on the west side of South Norton Avenue, midway between Coliseum Street and West 39th Street in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. What stood out about this body was not only was it severed into two pieces, but it was completely drained of blood, leaving it completely pale white. And this body was that of Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth Short was born July 29th, 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts. She was one of 5 daughters. I thought my family was weird because we're just 3 daughters, and I'm sure we drove my mom crazy. That's I can't funny. Imagine having just 5 daughters, and that was it. So she was one of 5 daughters. She was born to a Cleo and Phoebe May Short. Short spent most of her life in Boston. Her father had a career building miniature golf courses until 1929 when the stock market crashed.
I gotta say, that's kind of an awesome job, building miniature golf courses. That's amazing.
So in 1929, the stock market crashed, and like many that lived in America at the time, they went broke. So in 1930, her father's car was found abandoned on the Charleston Bridge, where at the time it was assumed that he had committed suicide by jumping into the Charles River. Short's mother moved the family into a small apartment in Medford where she worked as a bookkeeper to support all her girls. And I just want to say that her mom was a badass for being able to take care of 5 kids as a single mother after your husband's like, okay, see you guys later. You know, it's just...
It's I can't imagine doing it. I can't fathom raising 5 kids on my own.
She didn't give up and disappear on them, and I think that's incredibly admirable. Short wasn't the healthiest growing up. She suffered from bronchitis and severe asthma attacks, so much so that she actually had to have lung surgery when she was 15.
Wow.
And doctors recommended that she relocate to somewhere with a milder climate during the winters to help with her respiratory problems. And that's kind of like when people had tuberculosis, right? And they were like, west. Yeah, move west.
We talked about this, and we talked about Doc Holliday yesterday, and this came up, so...
This led to her spending winters in Miami, Florida, because who doesn't want to spend winters in Miami, Florida?
Isn't the humidity bad for your respiratory system?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I have no idea about any of the medical things. But so she spent winters in Miami, Florida for 3 years. And somewhere in the middle there, she dropped out of high school during her sophomore year. Then, boom, drama happens because why not? A letter shows up in 1942 from who else but Short's dead dad. So they get this letter from this guy that they have assumed to be dead for 12 years. And it's an apology letter to her mother, and it stated that he was living in California. So he had started this whole new life in California. What a piece of shit. Short was 18 at the time, and she just was like, all right. She got up, headed to Vallejo, California, or Vallejo. I don't know how to say it. She went to California. She went and lived with her dad. Unsurprisingly, moving in with a father she thought had been dead for 12 years was not a good idea.
I was going to say, why would you get up and be like, oh, this piece of shit that abandoned me, I'm going to go chill with him for a while.
So she lived with him and moved out after only a month. So she moved out after a month, got a job at what is now called the Vandenberg Air Force Base, where she lived with friends and at some point an Army Air Force sergeant who allegedly abused her, which is shitty. It's just shitty situations all around for her. She left the area after only 6 months and moved to Santa Barbara. So she's just on her feet constantly, go, go, go. I just think moving in with her supposedly dead dad, for after 12 years, you knew.
So where you been all this time?
Yeah, and so they had a fight, and so she was just like, I'm out, see ya. Life didn't get any simpler for her when she moved to Santa Barbara. She was arrested on September 23rd, 1943 for underage drinking at a local bar. I didn't know that you could get arrested for being the one that drank. I thought the bar gets like a ticket or a fine for serving.
They get in trouble for serving an underage person.
I didn't realize the underage kids get arrested too.
You just thought like they're just like, I got away with it. This
just
crazy
like,
scam.
I thought it was just like, go home, don't do it again, get out of here.
No, you get in deep shit.
I obviously have no experience with that because I was a goody two-shoes growing up. So.
There's a reason that if cops show up at an underage party, kids run.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
They're not just running for funsies. No one likes to run into the fucking woods or cornfields or any of that shit.
So apparently she was sent back to Medford by authorities, but she kind of changed her plans and headed to Florida instead. I didn't realize that they could do that to you. She was 18, but because she was underage and she drank, the authorities were like, you're going back to Massachusetts. I didn't know that officers or authorities could do that, but apparently they did. Anyway, she went to Florida instead. And I swear this woman must have just loved moving place to place because my head spins just writing out all the different places she had to move to in such a short amount of time. And she moved from Massachusetts to California, which is cross country.
Opposite ends of the country, yeah.
It's just insane. And then going back to Florida, that's another cross country trip from California. It's just, dang, that's a lot of moving. I imagine packing up all our stuff to move across the country. I can't even imagine.
I've done it before.
I would throw away everything.
It's a lot easier to just get new stuff when you get there and minimalize what you need when you get to your new spot than trekking all your shit across the country. It's a nightmare to do that.
So when in Florida, she met a Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., who was an Army Air Force officer, and he was training for deployment during World War II. They talked about getting married, like they hung out, they talked about getting married, but he died in a plane crash on August 10th, 1945, a week before the surrender of Japan.
That's so sad.
So it's just so unfortunate for her that she just keeps having so many unlucky things happen. It's just a lot of crappy stuff in her life. So she eventually moves back to LA in July of 1946 and visits a friend she'd known from Florida who was an Army Air Force lieutenant, Joseph Gordon Fickling.
I so thought Levitt was going to be the next thing you said.
When I read that, I was like, not Joseph Gordon Levitt? Dang. So she worked as a waitress, and there are some sources that kind of sensationalize the whole thing and make it seem like she moved to LA just to become an actress, and she wanted to be an actress since she was a kid, and that's just what she wanted to do in life, and nothing really says that. Not a lot of like FBI stuff or official police stuff says any of that. It's a lot of the media sensationalizing it and making it seem that way.
Which sucks, because there's a lot of people who want to do that, and I don't know if attaching that sort of motivation to them like makes... I think they do it to make you think, oh, this could be me, or this could be someone I know. But in the end, it just winds up making other people think, like, so that's what people who want to move to LA to become an actress want to be like? It's
just the typical waitress, actress, Hollywood trope. And I just think it's overplayed and unnecessary. It's unnecessary to add that into the story.
Right. Just to make people connect to it in one way or another.
She doesn't have any acting credits or any acting jobs under her belt, so it's hard to imagine that she was actually going out there and trying to do that. But who knows? Maybe that was her goal. It's been 70 years, so there's not really anybody around that could tell you if that's really what she was there for. She spent the last 6 months of her life there in LA. So her body was found just a few feet away from the sidewalk. So oh my gosh, if you see the pictures, it's like right on the fucking sidewalk, okay? But she was found by Betty Bersinger while walking around at 10 a.m. with her 3-year-old daughter. So this woman's just walking around with her toddler in the morning, and when she saw this, she thought it was just a mannequin because she was so pale, right? She thought it was a mannequin. And the more she saw, the more she looked at it, the realization hit her that this was a corpse. This was a body. There's no way. So she ran to a nearby house and called the police because there's no cell phones. Upon examination, it was determined that she'd been dead for about 10 hours prior to the discovery. So that's pretty recent.
Yeah, it's like midnight the night before.
Which led to the assumption that she died the night of January 14th or the early hours of the 15th. Other than the strange condition in which her body was found, it was also found that the killer had washed her body prior to posing her, which is probably why she was totally pale and drained of blood and stuff like that. He's like clearing out everything. Now, if you folks are squeamish, please skip ahead a couple of minutes, maybe even a few minutes, because it's just a lot of gory details. Yeah, you go do that. Press that button. Anyway, getting into it. So not only was she cut in two, she had a Joker-esque slash on her face.
Oh, wow.
So she was cut from the corners of her mouth, like all the way to her ears. And, oh man, I saw the pictures and I was just like, oh God. An effect. So this slice on her face is an effect known as the Glasgow Smile, and it's a practice that's said to have originated in Glasgow, Scotland in the 20s and 30s. Apparently, people were being mugged or attacked in the street, and people would do this to people. I don't know why. It's messed up. No one wants to look like the Joker, you know. She also had several cuts on her thigh and breasts. There were areas where chunks of flesh had literally been cut out.
Jesus Christ.
The killer had a messed up showmanship to it. She was posed a very particular way. Her lower half was placed only a foot away from her upper half. Her intestines had been carefully placed under her butt. Her arms were posed with her hands over her head and her elbows bent at right angles. It was clear that she'd been killed elsewhere and very purposely placed there, the way she was laying there. I mean, why else would you put it right on the sidewalk? You know what I mean? That's just, there's a reason you're doing it. Near the body, detectives found a heel print amid tire tracks, and nearby a cement stack containing watery blood was found. There are photos of the crime scene out there, and they are totally graphic, like absolutely graphic. Graphic to the point where it just doesn't look real.
So we're not going to have them on our Instagram, is what you're saying?
Because it's just, no, I would not post that. It's real.
It'll get taken down almost certainly, too.
And it's just so messed up to look at. And they have like close-ups of her face. And oh my gosh, it's just so scary to see because they're not just like little tiny slits. They're like big, gigantic gouges out of her face. It's messed up. An autopsy on Short was performed the day after, by Frederick Newbar, who was the LA County coroner at the time. He determined that she was 5 foot 5 inches and weighed 115 pounds. And I would say approximately 115 pounds because there was so much missing that you can't really say for sure, you know? She had light blue eyes, brown hair, and a really bad set of teeth. Dental hygiene was not high on her list of priorities.
That's sad.
Yeah. She was very pretty, though, which is strange. There were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, meaning she was definitely tied up or strangled prior to her death. There were also signs that she may have been raped, but any testing for evidence came back negative. There was also no evidence that she had ever been pregnant, despite so many rumors stating otherwise. Like, people were coming out of the woodwork saying, like, so-and-so got her pregnant or whatever, but there was literally no evidence of that. The way her body had been cut, it was like how she was sliced in half. It was an actual technique that was taught in the 1930s called a hemicorporectomy. And it's like you cut at a particular part in the spine and it just, and you just cut the whole thing down. It's gross. Newbar noted very little bruising along the incision, leading to believe it was performed post-mortem. But it's very little bruising, so it's probably soon after, maybe? I don't know. But Short's skull was not fractured. There was bruising noted, though, on the front right side of her scalp where slight bleeding was found. So this leads to the assumption that she did suffer blows to the head. Cause of death was determined to be the hemorrhaging from lacerations to her face and shock from blows to the head. So it's like everything focused on the brain area, you know? Police were able to identify the body as Short after sending her fingerprints off for identification. And they used fax machines back then. This wasn't email or internet. They were able to match them with those that she had taken at the time of her 1943 arrest. So she already had a record, so they were just able to match her fingerprints to that. She also applied to work at the Air Force Base at some point, so they also had records of that. So it was they were able to match her fingerprints, and they also had a picture of her from that. What are those pictures called when you go to jail?
Shots.
Yeah, so they had that. The media really sensationalized the murder, going so far as to describe the black tailored suit that she had been seen wearing last as a, quote, a tight skirt and a sheer blouse, end quote. The Examiner, and I'm sure many of you have heard of the Examiner and you know what that is, went on to describe her as a quote-unquote adventuress who, quote, prowled Hollywood Boulevard,
wow.
end quote. And seriously, the Examiner can be just hot trash.
What a fucking asshole.
It's just there, and that's the whole media thing for you, because they want to make it this huge thing. There was an article published by the Los Angeles Times just days after her discovery, calling it a quote-unquote sex fiend slaying, because of how she was found. You know what I mean? Or some said that she was actually tortured leading up to her death, which was denied by law enforcement. The media really does anything they can do to make money off of a tragedy. And they were just adding all these details that weren't true. They were sensationalizing it. They were making her out to be like a sex worker or something like that. But that was not, there's no evidence of her actually doing any of those things. They nicknamed her the Black Dahlia. That's what the media named her, the Black Dahlia. Some say it's a play on the movie The Blue Dahlia, or because she wore dahlias in her hair. On the FBI website, it states part of the nickname was, quote, for her rumored penchant for sheer black clothes, end quote. There's actually a whole FBI page on it, and you can click and see all the FBI documents and stuff like that. It was actually kind of interesting. And then others say it's maybe because she just had really dark hair. So it's not really known exactly how they came to the conclusion that we're calling her the Black Dahlia. That's what it is. It just kind of caught on. On January 21st, 1947, someone claiming to be the killer called the office of James Richardson, the editor of the Examiner, and congratulated him on the newspaper's coverage, which is... when it comes to the examiner, I'm like, did he actually call you, or are you just saying that?
Yeah, you're just saying it, and you're saying, hey, you said it was awesome, and I'm super tall, and everyone loves me.
Supposedly, he told Richardson that he planned on turning himself in eventually, but wanted to have the police have their go at finding him first. And they also told Richardson to, quote, expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail, end quote. It's some sick, morbid stuff.
Yeah, I'd say so.
On January 24th, so just days later after that call, a manila envelope was discovered by a worker at the U.S. Postal Service, and it was addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers. So the words had been cut and pasted from newspaper clippings, and then on the face of the envelope it read, here is, quote, here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow, end quote. And this envelope contained her birth certificate, it contained business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. So it's just a really strange package.
Yeah.
The whole thing had been meticulously cleaned of any evidence with gasoline. The only things found were a couple fingerprints, but they were written off as like evidence contamination during transit through the mail system. That same day, a handbag and a black suede shoe were found on top of a garbage can in an alley a short distance away from where Short's body was found. And these too were cleaned of any evidence, like any evidence that could have been there was destroyed by gasoline. On March 14th, months later, a note was found tucked in a shoe in a pile of men's clothing seen by a beach caretaker by the ocean's edge at the foot of Breeze Avenue in Venice, which I assume is California, not Italy. Venice is in Italy.
That's a safe assumption.
Okay. Jesus. So the clothes included a coat, trousers, a brown and white Y shirt. I don't even know what a Y shirt is. Why name it that?
Wow.
White jockey shorts, tan socks, and size 8 tan moccasin leisure shoes. And there was no evidence as to who the owner of this pile of clothes could possibly be. But the note that was found in the shoe, in one of the shoes, stated, quote, to whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that, or this. Sorry, Mary, end quote. So I'm just like, who the fuck is Mary?
Yeah.
Who's this dude? And what the heck happened, you know? Mark Hansen, the owner of the address book, he kind of became suspect number one, right? Because why is your stuff in with this manila envelope that got mailed to us?
It's just the easiest way to frame someone is to include something of theirs, but it's so obvious when it has their own name on it.
He owned a local nightclub and theater. He was also acquainted with the owner of the home Short stayed in with friends. And Hansen was also able to confirm that the shoe and purse that was found did indeed belong to Short. So he did have some information and a connection to her, so I could see police being like, well, you're kind of the closest thing we have here to a culprit. Ann Toth, one of Short's roommates, told investigators that she had recently turned down Hansen's sexual advances and that it may have been the reason for him to kill her, which is rude. Like, if a girl...
Oh, yeah, it's just kind of rude.
No, if a girl says no, like, you don't go and murder that person, you know? Also, if a girl says no, just leave it at that and move on. Okay. Hansen was ultimately cleared of any involvement with the murder. Investigators interviewed upwards of 150 men, hoping to find anyone who could be a suspect. Robert Red Manley was one of the last to have seen Short alive. He dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA, stating that Short was going to meet her sister, who was visiting from Boston that afternoon. So it's kind of strange that the last day he drops her off, she's going to go see her sister, and then the next day it's like she's gone, you know? Staff recalled seeing Short use the lobby telephone and was seen at the Crown Grill cocktail lounge about half a mile away from the hotel just a short time later. Manley was also cleared of any involvement after passing a bunch of polygraph tests, which we know now to not be the most reliable way to, cross someone off a suspect list. But this is the 1940s. Who knows?
They're like, look at this needle move. It tells us the truth.
Look at this polygraph.
Oh, man. That's a good fucking joke.
Thanks. Anyway, so about 750 investigators, I'm just laughing at myself now, that's good. About 750 investigators worked on the case, including 400 sheriff's deputies and 250 California State Patrol officers. And they searched high and low for any possible evidence. They searched storm drains, they searched abandoned buildings, they searched all the areas around the crime scene, anything that could possibly help, and they couldn't find anything at all. A $10,000 reward was offered for any info leading to the capture of the killer, and that's about $114,000 in today's currency. So that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
And because it's a large amount of money, it obviously led to an increase in calls and false confessions. And several of these false confessions actually got charged with obstruction of justice. It's just like...
Good. They fucking should, dude.
There were people that were confessing later, years down the road. There were people confessing to the murder that weren't even alive at the time the murder took place. It's just this... People have this strange fascination with it, right? But when you're offering big chunks of money like that, you're going to get so many people calling that honestly don't have anything to do with it. They know nothing at all. They just want the money. And it's really unfortunate when that happens. On February 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News reported that the case had, quote-unquote, run into a stone wall, and there really were no other avenues to pursue. They couldn't find any new evidence. They cleared all their possible suspects. I mean, they interviewed so many people, and they had no idea where to go from there. By that spring, it had become a cold case, which is unfortunate. There have been a number of people who believe that there is a link between Short's murder and the Cleveland torso murders that happened in Cleveland between 1934 and 1938. Investigators didn't think that there was any relationship between the two cases.
They never do.
They never do. And sometimes it actually comes out like, yes, it was connected. In 1980, evidence arose that implicated the torso murder suspect Jack Anderson Wilson, also known as Arnold Smith. I don't know why. I didn't look into the actual torso murders. Maybe that'll be a different episode. But there was evidence that arose that implicated him as being involved with the Black Dahlia murder. Detective St. John claimed that he was close to arresting him, but that Wilson died in a fire on February 4th, 1982, before any definitive statements or anything could be made.
Lucky bastard.
Oh my god. Steve Hodel, a crime author, has implicated his own father as the killer post-death, like after his father died. He's like, now let me talk some serious shit about this dude. He was looking through his dad's things and found a photograph of this woman that when he saw it, he was like, that's the black... Oh, God fucking damn it. He saw the photograph and was like, holy crap, that is the Black Dahlia. And so I was reading articles, and at first he started looking into it, thinking like, I'm going to exonerate my dad. That's my whole thing. I'm going to look into all this stuff, and I'm going to prove that he's innocent and he's not the one that did it or whatever. But eventually, things turned into the opposite direction. His dad was a doctor, so he trained as a surgeon. And Hodel was like, hello. He knew this doctor practice thing, the hemi, whatever, cutting people in half thing.
Method, yeah.
In 2003, it was revealed in notes from the 1949 grand jury report. There was a grand jury about this whole thing. It was crazy. Investigators wiretapped Hodel's home and recorded the following, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead," end quote. And it's suspected that he was the one to have killed his secretary.
Of course he did.
Lots of weird stuff revolves around this Hodel dude. And a lot of articles that you read will point to him as being like, he's the one, you know. In 2013, an article came out in the San Bernardino Sun detailing shit.
Jaguar.
Is that how they say it in the UK? Detailing? I don't fucking know. So this article in the San Bernardino Sun detailing an investigation into Hodel. And they took a police dog trained to sniff out decomposing flesh into Hodel's house. And this dog named Buster, such a cute name, detected the scent of human remains or like decaying flesh, you know, in several parts of the basement. Supposedly, soil samples were taken and submitted for testing, but I haven't seen any results of said testing, so I don't know. Throughout history, there have been a number of connections made between Short's murder and that of so many other people. Too many to cover on our short 1 hour. This is probably going to be like an hour and a half podcast. But there were like other women that got murdered. But the other ones that they said may have been connected to it were, it's like she wasn't cut up or anything. It's just someone painted or wrote on her mentioning the Black Dahlia or something like that. And it's like copycat killers exist. There are people that want the glory. Right, and even copycat killers try and like emulate the method used. They don't just happen to mention like another famous serial killer or murder. But sometimes those people are like, no, I can't go through with cutting someone in half, you know? I mean, I've never gone through with cutting someone in half, so I guess I empathize with that. So, jeez. So over time, it just seems like too many rumors have kind of stacked on top of each other. Like we were talking about earlier with them making her out to be this woman who just wanted to become this actress or this Hollywood star. And it kind of warps the story of Short's life into something that just makes the investigation that much harder. Because what do you know is real or not? Because it's been 70 years. A lot has been told and retold and added on to and changed. A tale as old as time. And fuck. So because of our morbid fascination with what we all know to be the Black Dahlia, it all just kind of gets convoluted. And there are parts that are like, yes, this is what happened in, like, concerning what they found. But everything around who she was as a person and what she did is just so up in the air because it's changed so many times. People tell the story based off of what they think will be the most entertaining or attract the biggest audience. Yes. Instead of just actually telling the truth. They turn it into storytelling time and not true crime telling time. She is laid to rest at the Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. She was only 22. Wow. She was just got over the year where she was legally allowed to drink, you know? And it's just so sad that she was so young. Her murder has been described as one of the most brutal and culturally enduring crimes in American history. Time magazine listed it as one of the most infamous unsolved cases in the world. It certainly is one of the oldest cold cases in LA, as well as its most famous case. So that is the Black Dahlia. You're welcome. Wow. I had no idea what it was about. Like, I've heard of it, obviously. Like, the term the Black Dahlia is something I've heard, like, time and time again. But it's kind of sad and really fascinating to hear, like, all the things that went into the investigation that resulted in basically nothing. No one finding out anything, aside from misinformation about who a person might have been that could have directly led to the fact that no one found out what happened because they were misrepresented. You know what's really sad is after her younger sisters, you know, moved out of their mom's house and kind of went off on their own, the mom moved to California to be closer to the grave. Oh, and she stayed there until the 70s and then moved back to Massachusetts, where she lived into her 90s. Wow. She was probably hoping that entire time that someone would find something. Yeah. And it really sucks with cold cases where there's not a living suspect left, because then you can't get a sort of confession, you know? You can't get, like, the final closure on it. So maybe one day, I don't know, medical science or any form of science that investigates things like this will... Who knows if there's even any DNA evidence that they could have even saved.
Yeah.
You know?
But who knows if we'll ever get an actual definitive answer on that. But it sounds like they have a pretty good idea of who did it. And they unfortunately died in a fire, which is a pretty good way for a murderer to go.
Well, that's one person. And then there's that Dr. Hodel dude who people think may have been the killer too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of suspects. Like I said, there's a lot of connections, a lot of suspects, and it's just a lot to cover in our little episode here. But you guys can totally look into it. It's just something that'll probably never have a definitive answer to, which is unfortunate.
It's always very sad with true crime, but I think you did a very good job. So
thanks.
Good stuff, Robin. Not good stuff. Good topic. Okay, it's getting weird. Good work. There we go. Good work on a horribly tragic topic. So, all right. I think that's everything for episode 142. For folks who have any stories that they would like to send us regarding paranormal, true crime, supernatural, spooky, anything like that, any experiences that you've had, a friend, a family member has had, that you would like to share with us and have us share on the Storytime episodes, please email storytime@scaryish.com. You can also go to facebook.com/scarishpodcast and hit us up there. Twitter is @scarishpod, Instagram is @scarishpodcast, or you can go to our website, scarish.com, and click on Contact Us, fill out that form, and send it directly to us. And we would love to share your story, and we'd love to hear your story. So for folks who would like to donate to us monetarily, Robin, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast. Those are monthly donations. Even if you join at $1, we do have a $1 tier, at least you get ad-free episodes. Who doesn't love ad-free episodes? At $3, you can join in on those polls and help us choose topics in the future. And then we also have a coffee, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast, and those are one-time donations. All your donations that you folks give to us help us upgrade our studio setup, help us have more time to make more content, and just mean the world. It really does mean the world to us that you folks support us, and we hope that you folks enjoy episodes like this.
Indeed. So thank you so much for all the support that we receive from you. It's amazing that we have a patron or a Patreon that we can go to and say, like, hey, what would you like us to cover? And people actually come out and participate and vote and say, this is what we want to hear. So it's just a really cool thing that we are lucky enough to do, and we appreciate it every single day. So one last time, thank you to everyone. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed it. That's just about everything we have. So, Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.